Thursday, the White House declared a national emergency due to the alleged threat posed by Cuba to the U.S. and the rest of the region. This is yet another attempt to hide U.S. true intentions of unilaterally suffocating the island under the rhetoric of national security. U.S. President Donald Trump signed an executive order which provides a pretext for intensifying the criminal economic blockade against the Caribbean island. The unilateral measure authorizes Washington to impose additional tariffs on imports from any nation that directly or indirectly supplies oil to Cuba. The order allows the Secretaries of State and Commerce to implement the tariff system and related measures, including issuing rules and guidelines. Let's see some more information on this. The U.S. blockade against Cuba has had a devastating impact on the island's economy during more than 6 decades, undermining the country's development and the well-being of its population. According to figures published by the island's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the blockade has caused material damages and losses to Cuba's economy during the more than 6 decades in force of over $2.3 trillion US. Only between March of 2024 and February of 2025, the impact was over $7.5 billion. The export losses, on the other hand, was of $2.6 billion and that of geographical relocation of trade of $1.2 billion. On the other hand, the blockade cost the island an average of more than $629 million per month, over 20 million per day, and more than 860,000 per hour. According to experts, the island's GDP in 2024 would have increased 9.2% if it wasn't blockaded. Cuba's Foreign Minister Bruno Rodriguez condemned this new escalation by the United States against his country. Through his official account on the social network X, Rodriguez stated, "We condemn in the strongest terms the new escalation by the U.S. against Cuba. Now it proposes to impose a total blockade on fuel supplies to our country. To justify this, it relies on a long list of lies that seek to portray Cuba as a threat that it is not. Every day, new evidence emerges that the U.S. government is the only threat to peace, security, and stability in the region and the only malign influence in our Americas. It tries to subject the nations and peoples of our Americas to its dictates, strip them of their resources, mutilate their sovereignty, and deprive them of their independence. The U.S. also resorts to blackmail and coercion to try to get other countries to join its universally condemned policy of blockade against Cuba, threatening those that refuse with the imposition of arbitrary and abusive tariffs in violation of all free trade rules. We denounce this brutal act of aggression against Cuba and its people, who have been subjected to the longest and cruelest economic blockade ever imposed against an entire nation for more than 65 years, and who are now promised to be subjected to extreme living conditions." Also, for his part, Cuba's Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, Carlos de Cosio, also condemned the new criminal escalation, expressing the following on his X social media account: "In the face of decades of relentless economic warfare, the United States is strengthening its siege against Cuba, attempting to force sovereign states to join the blockade. Under threats of tariff coercion, they must decide whether to deprive themselves of the right to export their own fuel to Cuba." And also in this context, the Chinese government reaffirmed its support for Cuba, expressing its strong rejection to foreign actions that threaten the Caribbean island.
Supports Cuba in safeguarding its national sovereignty and security and opposing external interference. We also resolutely oppose any action that deprives the Cuban people of their right of survival and development, as well as inhuman acts.
In this context, the President of Cuba, Miguel Díaz-Canel, denounced the measure taken by U.S. President Donald Trump to intensify the blockade against the island. Through his social media accounts, Díaz-Canel stated, "Under a false pretext and without any arguments sold by those who engage in politics and enrich themselves at the expense of our people's suffering, President Trump is attempting to suffocate the Cuban economy by imposing tariffs on countries that sovereignly trade oil with Cuba." He goes on to ask, didn't the Secretary of State and hurricanes say that the blockade didn't exist? Where are those who bore us with their false stories that it is simply an embargo on bilateral trade? The president concluded this new measure demonstrates the fascist, criminal, and genocidal nature of a clique that has hijacked the interest of the U.S. people for purely personal gain. More on this. In the scenario of the intensified blockade, Cuban intellectual and president of the Casa de las Americas, Abel Prieto, denounced the unilateral measure announced by the U.S. president. Through his social accounts, he emphasized that the counter-revolution is euphoric about Trump's executive order. They believe, or want to believe, that this marks the beginning of the end for the Cuban revolution. Once again, they are underestimating our people, our party, and our government. In this edition, the Cuban intellectual also stated that we are also convinced that many decent people around the world, including in the U.S. itself, will support the small and brave David in his resistance against the lying and cowardly Goliath, who is sick with pride and greed through all means at their disposal. We will win, he finished. More reactions on this. The Young Communist League of Cuba also condemned the recent U.S. actions as another measure to economically suffocate the Caribbean nation. Through an official statement, the organization stated that the decree declaring a national emergency due to the alleged threat that Cuba poses to his country and the rest of the region is completely unfounded and a blatant lie. Moreover, the Cuban youth denounced the action flagrantly violates the norms, purposes, and principles of the Charter of the United Nations and international law, assuring that Cuba is not a threat to the United States or any other country and has the right to develop its economic and trade relations without conditions of any kind. In its closing remarks, the organization stressed that among young Cubans, there will never be a hint of defeated or surrender, and vowed to defend our homeland whatever the cost. Meanwhile, the former Minister of Foreign Affairs and Human Mobility of Ecuador, Guillaume Long, also condemned the measure. In his X account, Long stressed Cuba is not an unusual and extraordinary threat to the United States. This total suffocation of the Cuban people through the imposition of a blockade on the sale of fuel is not only cruel and imperial, but also, according to international law, an act of war. Blockades are only legal in cases of self-defense. They are always illegal when they seek to collectively punish the civilian population. In such cases, they may constitute a war crime and even a crime against humanity. All states must unequivocally reject this new crime of aggression and act to counter its effects. For her part, Spanish Member of Parliament Irene Montero also took to her socials to denounce the U.S. is besieging Cuba with a total oil embargo, adding to the criminal blockade of food, medicine, and all kinds of products that have been in place for 65 years. This is pure state terrorism aimed at taking over Cuba as well. What are we waiting for to stop them if they are already destroying everything? And one of the topics of the day, U.S. social organizations called for a national shutdown to begin this Friday to demonstrate the rejection of the Trump administration's anti-immigrant policies and to denounce the deployment of ICE and Border Patrol agents in Minneapolis and other cities. Following deadly shootings and raids carried out by ICE, organizers are urging citizens to stop working, attending school, and spending money to protest the agency crackdown surging across the country. In this scenario, they are also calling on Congress to cut funding to the Department of Homeland Security, which oversees ICE, when it votes on the current funding package ahead of a possible federal government shutdown. On Friday, student groups at the University of Minnesota will lead a walkout on campus, joined by unions and immigrant rights organizations. They are also planning additional ICE out of everywhere protests on Saturday at ICE detention centers and offices, as well as at airports to target airlines that transport ICE detainees. Precisely as we were saying, we go live at this moment to the United States. These are live images from Minneapolis in Minnesota. We were saying this in the context of the call to a national shutdown in order to protest the actions of the federal agents of the ICE agency against the migrant shutdown and also against the repression that is being held against the people of the United States. Images that we have been seeing, also 2 people that were killed recently just in the last 2 weeks in Minnesota, and the protests have not stopped. People continue to go on the streets because they are defending the right to peace in their own territories. In this case, it's Minnesota, but the entire country is in solidarity with Minneapolis at this moment. Again, we are seeing live images from Minneapolis where citizens and representatives, including Ilhan Omar, are protesting outside the Bishop Henry Whipple Federal Building, the first stop for immigrants detained in the recent enforcement surge and the site where dozens of bystanders and observers have been held after arrest. We will continue to follow this closely throughout the day, this national shutdown against ICE agents and their operations within the Trump administration, this in the United States today, Friday. United States, another partial shutdown of the U.S. government is imminent this day following the decision by Democratic senators to oppose the budget packages that includes funding for the Department of Homeland Security, the DHS. This decision adds pressure on President Donald Trump, who already faces opposition to his immigration policies, and another government shutdown could further complicate the economy. The final straw was the controversy surrounding the killing last Saturday of U.S. citizen Alex Pretty by federal immigration agents in Minneapolis. Chuck Schumer, the Senate's Democratic minority leader, confirmed that his caucus will not provide the 60 votes needed to pass the 6th appropriations bill unless the section on the DHS is removed. In this context, citizens and representatives in Minnesota, including Ilhan Omar, are protesting outside the Bishop Henry Whipple Federal Building, the first stop for immigrants detained in the recent enforcement surge, and the site where dozens of bystanders and observers have been held after arrest. Let's not forget that these protests were sparked by the death of a second U.S. citizen in less than a month during immigration raids in Minneapolis. During the first year of Donald Trump's second term as president of the United States, the number of migrants who died in the custody of Immigration and Customs Enforcement have tripled. According to ICE reports, medical complications such as heart failure, stroke, seizures, and even suicide are some of the reasons the agency has attributed to these deaths of people under their supervision. According to the figures, in Trump's first year from January to December of 2025, at least 32 migrants died due to poor conditions while in custody of ICE agents. Also in the scenario, the American Civil Liberties Union warned that ICE current oversight and accountability mechanisms regarding death in custody are inadequate and insufficient to prevent future deaths. The organization has identified problems with the agency related to medical services for detained migrants, such as incomplete treatment and medication, lack of timely emergency care, and insufficient certified medical staff. The union also asserted that at least 95% of the deaths that occurred under ICE care could have been prevented if adequate medical care had been provided. Thursday,
and the U.S. Department of Justice opened a civil rights investigation into the killing of Alex Pretty by federal agents in Minneapolis. The announcement was made on Friday by Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche during a press conference after the Department of Homeland Security said it was no longer leading to federal probe into Pretty's death. According to a statement issued by the DHS Assistant Secretary Tricia McLaughlin, the FBI was now in charge of the investigation. However, the Department of Justice has reportedly refused to open a similar action into the killing of Renee Nicole Good on January 7th. Iran has announced that it is ready to resume dialogues on its nuclear program with the United States, but is setting equal conditions for the negotiations. Iranian Foreign Minister Sajed Abbas Araghchi emphasized that the nuclear program will go ahead if the interests and concerns of the Persian nation are respected. In this regard, he emphasized that the atomic program is for peaceful purposes and that its missiles are not part of nuclear weapons negotiations for military use. Araghchi also assured that his country has the full capacity to confront any military aggression it arises. The Lebanese resistance movement Hezbollah also condemned any threat against the Islamic Republic of Iran and reiterated its commitment to take all necessary measures to confront any external aggression. The Secretary General of the Lebanese resistance, Naim Qassem, points out that an attack on the Persian nation constitutes a direct threat to regional and global stability. The Sheikh stated that Hezbollah will not remain neutral in the face of a possible aggression by the United States or Israel against Tehran, which could unleash chaos in the Middle East. He also pointed out that an attack against the leader of the Iranian revolution will have repercussions for peace throughout the world. Also in this scenario, the Cuban Network of Intellectuals, Artists and Social Movements in Defense of Humanity, REDH, expressed through an official statement its rejection to the U.S. unilateral measures to intensify the blockade against Cuba. Through its official statement, it expressed, "This statement is monumentally false and cynical. The U.S. President is openly lying. When he talks about collaboration with hostile countries, he is actually condemning the will of a people to freely engage with the world." The network highlighted that this is an escalation of a total state of siege against the population, which represents another slap in the face for the deniers who insist on shouting that the blockade does not exist. And Cuba's Casa de las Americas rejected on Friday U.S. President Donald Trump's executive order that seeks to intensify the blockade against the Caribbean island. In a message posted on social media, the cultural institution said that after more than 6 decades of a cruel blockade and aggression of all kinds, as criminal as they were ineffective in their effort to destroy the Cuban Revolution, President Donald Trump signed an executive order on January 29th that aims to definitely eliminate the so-called Cuban problem. All kinds of lies are being recycled with the aim of turning our country, in the eyes of public opinion, into an unusual and extraordinary threat to the national security and foreign policy of the United States. We are not surprised by this position of a government that regularly resorts to extortion, bombings, kidnapping, and even the cold-blooded murder of its own citizens. However, the attempt to suffocate an entire people in order to impose imperial will is particularly perverse. The text ends by expressing that even in the early days of the Fair Play for Cuba Committee and its slogan, Hands Off Cuba, we had the support of a good part of the people of the United States. Today, we once again appeal to that people for their support in stopping the genocide project underway. Hands Off Cuba.
Of a formality, but as the ratification of our unbreakable commitment with the institutional stability and the Republican order. In a same sentiment with the soul moved by grief, we burn the sacred flame of honor and the eternal recognition to our Venezuelan and Cuban brothers that fell in the early hours of January 3rd. These martyrs of the homeland sealed with their blood the highest oath of loyalty. May their sacrifice not be a tribute to hate, but a sacred offering to the ideas of Bolivarian peace. Their names that are in our hearts and in the stone of history ask us beyond any political flag or difference of thinking, elevating the look to the identity that calls us. I want to honor the Venezuelan women, the heroes of the homeland whose value was highlighted in the darkest hours of the independent fights. The daughters of Venezuela, we are the alive body of that sacred inheritance. In this altar of history, I do a special recognition to the First Lady, Dr. Celia Flores de Maduro. Symbol of a strength that doesn't bend, the woman that accompanies and guides with her example. The sentiment is united in the breath of millions of women that from their homes sustain the soul of the family and the destiny of the country. We are of the type of women whose loyalty transforms pain and resistance. We do not only sustain the home, we are the architects of hope. Our love is not only affection, it is an act of bravery. Our preparation, it is the steel for the battles to come, and our everything, it is a deep sentiment of love for our beloved Venezuela. May this tribute not to be left, but to be turned in the base of a nation where sacrifice finds their point in social justice, because in the temple of our women, those who are and those who guide us from eternity, beats the heart of a homeland that will never, not before anything or anyone, will surrender. The Bolivarian diplomacy of peace, as the leader of the sovereignty, the judicial function is elevated today as a shield of the republic, facing the complexities of the global context, symbol of the firm will of a nation that is free, sovereign, and in full exercise of their historical dignity. From the judicial power, we assume the commitment of contributing in the building of the new legal system proposed by the Dr. Delcy Rodriguez Gomez, acting President of the Republic, and by our gorgeous National Assembly in the person of its President, Jorge Rodriguez Gomez. This shared effort is the center stone for the building of a Venezuelan state that is more solid and efficient, a path to the judicial security, the social harmony, and the consolidation of the economy of our homeland. We are committed in persisting with the transformation of the system of administration of justice, thinking in an alternative model where it promotes and increases the access, the accompanying, and the equality of conditions and opportunities for the people, such as it has been referenced by Dr. Delcy Rodriguez Gomez. We declare that the state of Venezuelan right stays firm and that the legality is not broken by acts of force. That this stage, guided by the constitutional values and the patriotic efforts, may be remembered as the moment in which Venezuela, united and unbendable, reaffirmed its destiny of freedom. Let's continue moving forward, having present in all times the words of the acting president, Dr. Delcy Rodriguez Gomez, and I quote, "A lot of strength, patience, and strategic prudence, and a lot of commitment and loyalty with this homeland," end of the quote. May the justice be our flag and the constitutional refuge, the Supreme Court of Justice of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela starts its judicial year 2026. God bless our noble people. Long live the homeland. United and in peace we will win. On the path of justice, 68.8%. In the framework of the relaunching of the mission Guardians of the Homeland that contemplates programs of social economical attention for our police members, workers, we have decided that the installations of Alicoide, which today serve as a center of detention, be turned in a social center, sports center and cultural center and commercial center for the police families and for the communities that are close to these prisons.
De igual manera,
likewise, I ask, I am going to tell a personal story here, facing my nephews, together with the mother of my nephews, Lucia, Juan Pedro, and Matias. Lucas knows because Lucas has a different mom. We conformed when we were students a commission that was called Prisoners with No Sentence, and we went to the attention in the prisons of those prisoners that were victim of judicial law-taking, that were deprived of freedom from 17 years and the crimes they had committed when 1 or 2 year sentences. That process is still a concern. That is why I was joyful that in the balance we saw an important increase in the judicial activity, and I congratulate the tribunals of the country, the courts of the country, because it is one of the challenges that the justice in Venezuela has had. The challenges, the access to justice. Cases that we know here, we have the magistrates of the social room. I congratulate the words of the magistrate Carlos. We can continue having firm steps in cohesion and in national union, and justice is a space for the national union because it is justice for the tutelage of the rights of all Venezuelan men and women, without any distinction between their social classes or their access of any kind of power. It is the concept of universal justice that a country must have to sustain itself. Venezuela must be turned in a country, in a movement for peace through justice, for justice to bring peace and lasting peace for Venezuela, and brings tranquility and stability, and for the victory of Venezuela to be able to be a victory that is lasting thanks to justice. Our Article 26 of the Constitution says that the state will guarantee a free justice that is accessible, impartial, ideal, transparent, autonomous, independent, responsible, equal, and fast, without delays, without formalisms or useless repositions. The announcements that we have presented today are for this article to be alive in all the sense and in all the extension of the words, because this article consecrates also the spirit of our father liberator Simón Bolívar, and they will also have the spirit of Chávez when he reached the political power in Venezuela, to say to a vast majority of the country that had been excluded by the political elites in our homeland, to tell them, here we must have equality, inclusion, equity, and social justice. So I ask if you and I close with the words of our father Simón Bolívar. The justice is the queen of the republican virtues, and with it, it is sustained the equality and the freedom, which are the columns of this building, where from here, from this maximum house of the justice in the country, I ask of you that justice be turned in the queen of the republican virtues, and for us to be able from justice to guarantee the peace and the future of Venezuela as a nation that is independent, free, sovereign, and of peace. Thank you very much, brothers and sisters.
We are live at this hour to Venezuela, where the Supreme Justice Tribunal opened the 2026 judicial. In this context as well, the Mexican government has stated that new tariff measures by the United States against nations that sell oil to Cuba could trigger a humanitarian crisis in the largest of the Antilles. Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum rejected the U.S. measure and the more than 60-year-old blockade of Cuba. She also pointed out that new restrictions could directly affect hospitals, food, and other basic services for the survival and development of a country, which are human rights. Finally, he assured that she will continue to support Cuba and will seek mechanisms to provide humanitarian aid to the Cuban people.
We need to know the scope of the measure because we don't want to put our country at risk in terms of tariffs. We want to know the scope and will always seek diplomatic channels, non-confrontation, dialogue, seek diplomatic channels, and seek different ways to support. The United States is sending humanitarian aid to the island, for example, food and other supplies to the island and the Cuban people, and we will look for ways to do so without putting Mexico at risk, of course, but